Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Had to make a video because the entire chess world right now is talking about the fact that Magnus Carlsen just lost his first game in over 2 years. At least classical game. He's definitely lost a rapid or blitz game. When you think of time control, classical being more of the games lasting a couple hours, and blitz and rapid being more of you're counting it in minutes. But lost his first classical game in over 2 years. 125 game streak. 42 wins, 83 draws. No one's beaten Magnus Carlsen since July of 2018. Bobby Fischer's longest streak was 20 games. Just to give you some context of how amazing this was for Magnus Carlsen. Longest streak out there for a player. Magnus Carlsen, world champion. You know, he's playing the best of the best, and to not lose for 2 years is crazy. But at the Norway Chess Tournament going on right now, hometown, home country at least, for Magnus Carlsen, loses to Jan-Krzysztof Duda, 22-year-old player from Poland, and he has been phenomenal lately. Over the past year and a half, just climbed by the rankings, almost cracking into the top 10. We'll see how he finishes in this tournament, but just played an amazing game today with the white pieces to give Magnus Carlsen first defeat in over 2 years. And afterwards, Jan-Krzysztof said he didn't even think he played that well. Thought he made a lot of mistakes, but was fortunate enough to get the win. Magnus Carlsen fought to the very end, but Jan-Krzysztof earned the victory. So I thought we'd go ahead and go over that game today. Duda starts out with e4 and then c6, d4, and then we get into the Caro-Kann. Not something we expected from Magnus Carlsen. Knight to c3. We see the exchange here on e4, and then after knight f6, knight takes here on f6, pawn captures here on f6. Kind of the old theory was to take with your g-pawn, but kind of modern theory says to go ahead and just take here. Yes, white's going to have a better pawn structure, but this does open up for some rapid development from black, so it's fine since black has the bishop pair here. c3, and then bishop to d6, preparing to castle on the king side. Bishop to d3, has some options as well to castle on the king side at some point. Castle, and then queen to c2. So the queen and the bishop both attacking the pawn here on h7. Black has a couple options. Could play f5, could play g6, could play h6, h5. Decides first for an in-between move of rook to e8. You're going to do it at some point, but this is check, so buys you a move here. Knight to e2. And then h5 is the move from Magnus Carlsen. And the pawns over here, if you kind of look at it, they're protecting a lot of these g-squares. So g6, g5, and g4 are all protected by the pawns over here. So another reason that you would take with your e-pawn here does allow you to just protect more of the squares that Jan-Krzysztof may be looking to attack here. Bishop to e3 now has a couple options here. Could castle on the king side or the queen side. Knight to d7, and then castle on the queen side. b5, Bobby Fischer, as soon as castles on the queen side, starts to attack here. And then white plays the move d5. Now, what's interesting about this is afterwards, they're obviously interviewing the players, and they asked Jan-Krzysztof, this took you about 20 minutes. And he said, yeah, I was really trying to figure out, all the calculations once the pawn takes here. Because there's a couple options. You could have the bishop just takes here on b5. So that's one. You could have bishop to h7. And then depending on where the king moves, maybe king to h8. This bishop's still protected. But then you have rook takes here on d5. And so he was just playing all those different scenarios of what happens once Magnus Carlsen takes here on d5. And as soon as he plays d5, remember he thought about this for 20 minutes, Magnus Carlsen immediately played c5. And he's like, okay, well, that was not what I was expecting at all. Decides to go and take with his bishop here on b5. So Magnus Carlsen giving up some material for a very, very strong attack. Rook here to b8, attacking this bishop. Pawn to c4, and then a6. Now, the commentators on the game, you have Kramnik and Svidler, two of the top players to play the game. They thought Magnus Carlsen would actually play rook takes here on e3, and after the pawn takes, then knight to e5, great outpost in the center of the board. And they say while black is down material, it's very difficult for white to actually find compensation, and it's a pretty good position for black here. That's not what Magnus Carlsen decided to do. Instead, plays a6 here. Bishop comes back to a4, and then rook to e7. Now, in this variation, you can go back in the database and see when this has been played at top level. Before this, rook to e5 was really the play. Rook to e7 is a novel move that Magnus Carlsen seemed that he had prepared for this. And the idea is that after knight to g3, knight to e5, great outpost as we talked about, then the rook can come over to b7, semi-open file, start to double up and really attack this queen side for white. Now we see e4 from white, rook over here to b7. b3 was looking at some other options like queen to c3, but at the end decided to just go ahead and solidify the pawn chain with b3. And then rook b4, and Duda said he was not expecting this at all from Magnus Carlsen. He was really expecting bishop here to f5 and said he didn't even know how to respond correctly because he really didn't like f3. So was pleasantly surprised once he saw rook to b4. Bishop to d2 attacking the rook, and Magnus Carlsen says, yeah, I'll just continue to give up material because I have a very strong attack. So trades the rook off for the bishop here. Now the double pawns on the a file, it's going to be difficult for white to hold on to this. Magnus Carlsen should be able to get that material back, but giving up that rook, that's a lot of material that Magnus Carlsen's giving up. Does still have the bishop pair here, brings the bishop down to f5. We have rook to e1, protecting the knight. Also just giving some air for the king to move if he needs to. Pawn to h4, pawn up here to h3. Difficult to see exactly how Magnus Carlsen should continue here. Obviously has given up some material, so wants to keep the pressure on. Some of the thoughts that the commentators had were maybe knight to g4, trying to add more pressure. h4 doesn't seem to put too much pressure on white. Seemed pretty fine just playing h3, stopping that attack here. Knight comes back here to g6, rook to e3, knight down here to f4, trying to attack as much as possible. Pawn up here to g4, attacking the bishop. Bishop swings back to g6, and then king to d1. If you look at this knight here on f4, it's kind of a nuisance. It can come to all these awkward squares at some point, check the king. So Duda just decides go ahead and play king to d1, stop all of those threats. f5 here, knight takes the bishop here on d6, and after the queen takes, pawn to f5, bishop to h5, check, and then you have f3 stopping that attack. You can see Magnus Carlsen with the pieces he has left really trying to apply pressure, knowing that he's down the material. And as they continue to trade off pieces, this is not going to go good for Magnus Carlsen. Magnus continues with queen to f6, and then bishop c3 attacking the queen. Queen g5, queen up here to e4, and Duda said, yeah, I should just play the rook to e1. Did not like the queen to e4, but plays queen to e4, queen down here, g2, and then rook e1. You can see the queen, rook, and rook all along this e-file, getting ready to attack the king here. Queen takes here on a2, but really just isolates the queen over here. Probably not the best move for Magnus Carlsen. Tough to get all of his pieces working together. The knight right here on f4, kind of by himself. Bishop here on h5. Not doing too much, although eventually could take this pawn here. Would like to get the rook down here to b1, but there's just no way to do that because white gets to respond. So queen to c2, stopping the attack. Queen takes on c4, but then rook to e8. And there's a couple options that black has here. If you exchange, well, okay, you're just going down material and you don't have much left. If you don't, though, king to h7, then you're going to give up a rook in exchange for taking some pawns here, but knowing that you're going to be down quite a bit of material. So queen takes here on d5, check. Queen to d2, cannot lose the queen here. That would just be easy victory for white. Bishop to f3, check after taking the pawn. King c1, queen over here to f5, and you can see white's definitely up a ton in material. Rook here to e3, stopping this knight coming to d3, but actually could have just played queen to d8, because now if you see knight to d3 check, you could just see king to d2, and you can't even take the rook there on e1. That would be checkmate. Queen to g8, and then you could see queen takes here on g7. This is all because the bishop here on c3. So at the end of the day, this would be checkmate. But heat of the moment, you feel like you have a good position. It's Magnus Carlsen, always tricky to find the absolute best moves. I needed to recognize that rook to e3 was not the best move in the post-game commentary, but still thought he had a very good position here. So king to b2, knight takes here on c3, queen takes on c3, queen to f4, queen d3, check, and then pawn to f5, rook over here to f8. Magnus Carlsen doing a very good job of continuing to check White's king. White doing the best job he can, trying to just trade off queens, knowing that he has two rooks to this bishop. If he could just trade off the queens, that would be a pretty easy victory. And then eventually we get to a spot where White is able to just take this bishop here on e4. He has two rooks. He can easily trade a rook for a bishop, and then he doesn't have to worry about too many threats right here. And then it just becomes a matter of not making a huge mistake. Now, Magnus Carlsen, credit to him, never stopping the attack the rest of the game. A lot of players would just resign knowing that they are down essentially a rook. Magnus Carlsen continues to play the rest of the game. And then at the end, what I appreciate from Jan-Krzysztof is he ends on such a beautiful move. Queen to h7, check, king down here to g4, and you have forced the trade here. You could take with your queen, very easy victory, but he plays rook to e4, check, and you can obviously see, yes, the queen can take, and the queen falls, and White's left with the queen. Cannot move the king anywhere where he can still protect the queen. And so in this case, Magnus Carlsen recognizes he's going to lose the queen. No way to continue. Resigns in this position. Was pretty devastated that he lost 125 games. Still incredible to think about. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Even if you haven't been watching the Norway Chess 2020, now at least you know some of the highlights that are going on. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.